June 8th, 1969, El Salvador. An 18-year-old girl named Amelia Bolaños is watching a soccer match on television at home. El Salvador versus Honduras, a World Cup qualifier. The biggest game either country has ever played. In the final minute, Honduras scores. They win 1-0. Amelia gets up from the television. She walks to her father's desk. She opens a drawer, pulls out a pistol, and shoots herself in the heart. Her funeral will be broadcast on national television. The president of El Salvador will walk behind her coffin. The entire national soccer team will march in the procession. A newspaper will write that she could not bear to see her country brought to its knees. 5 weeks later, El Salvador will invade Honduras with tanks, planes, and 12,000 soldiers. Thousands of people will die, all because of a soccer match. Well, sort of. The real reasons go way deeper, but the soccer was definitely the spark. You're listening to Wait, That Actually Happened? Where we prove history is stranger than fiction. I'm your host, author Daniel P. Douglas, and today we're talking about the football war of 1969, the time two countries went to actual war over World Cup qualifying matches. Buckle up, this one gets wild. Okay, let's set the scene. El Salvador and Honduras are neighbors in Central America. They share a border, they share a history. They both got independence from Spain on the same day in 1821, and by the 1960s they shared a massive problem. El Salvador was tiny and packed with people. About 3.5 million people crammed into a country roughly the size of New Jersey. Honduras was 5 times bigger but had fewer people, only about 2.6 million. In El Salvador, 14 wealthy families controlled most of the land. Regular people had almost nothing. About 200,000 farmers didn't own any land at all. So what do you do when your country is overcrowded and you can't get land? You move next door. Starting in the early 1900s, Salvadorans began crossing into Honduras looking for farmland and jobs. By 1969, over 300,000 Salvadorans were living in Honduras. That's more than 10% of Honduras's entire population. Many worked on banana plantations. Others squatted on unused land and started farming it. For a while, nobody cared too much. Honduras had the space. The Salvadorans worked hard. But then Honduras started having its own economic problems. Unemployment went up. People got angry. And politicians did what politicians do. They blamed the immigrants. In 1962, Honduras passed a land reform law. The government took land that Salvadoran immigrants had been farming, sometimes for decades, and gave it to native Hondurans. By 1969, the Honduran president refused to renew an immigration treaty with El Salvador. Salvadorans started getting kicked out. Thousands of families who had lived in Honduras for years were forced to leave. Some were beaten. Some had their property stolen. They streamed back across the border into an El Salvador that was already too full. Both countries had military governments. Both countries had media that loved to stir the pot. Honduran newspapers blamed Salvadorans for every problem. Salvadoran newspapers called Hondurans barbarians. The press on both sides used words like Nazis and savages and thieves. It was a pressure cooker. All it needed was a spark. Enter soccer. In June 1969, El Salvador and Honduras had to play each other in a 2-game series to qualify for the 1970 World Cup in Mexico. This was a huge deal. Neither country had ever played in a World Cup before. National pride was on the line. And given everything else going on, this wasn't just a game. It was a proxy war with cleats. Game 1, June 8th. The Salvadoran team arrived in Honduras the day before the match. That night, Honduran fans surrounded their hotel. They threw rocks at the windows. They set off firecrackers. They leaned on car horns and screamed all night long. Psychological warfare, basically. The idea was to keep the Salvadoran players from sleeping. It worked. Honduras won 1-0 on a last minute goal. That's when Amelia Bolaños shot herself. The Salvadoran media turned her into a national martyr overnight. Game 2, San Salvador, June 15th. Now it was El Salvador's turn, and they turned the cruelty up to 11. The Honduran team spent the night before the game getting the same treatment, but worse. Fans broke every window in their hotel. They threw rotten eggs, dead rats, and stinking rags inside. The players got zero sleep. The next day, the Honduran team had to ride to the stadium in armored military vehicles. Armed soldiers lined the route. Along the way, fans held up pictures of Amelia Bolaños. At the stadium, soldiers with machine guns surrounded the pitch. When it came time to play the Honduran national anthem, the crowd booed and screamed over it. Then, instead of raising the Honduran flag, someone ran a dirty, torn dish rag up the flagpole. The actual Honduran flag had already been burned in front of the crowd. El Salvador won 3-0. The Honduran coach said afterward, "We're awfully lucky that we lost." He meant it. If Honduras had won, his team might not have made it out alive. As the Honduran fans tried to leave, they were attacked. 2 people were killed. Dozens were hospitalized. Cars were set on fire. The border between the two countries was closed hours later. Game 3, Mexico City, June 27th. With the series tied, a playoff was held on neutral ground at Azteca Stadium in Mexico City. 5,000 Mexican police were brought in to keep the peace. El Salvador won 3-2 in extra time. That same day, El Salvador cut all ties with Honduras. No more diplomats, no more talking. The door to peace was slamming shut. In the days following, things got worse fast. Salvadorans still living in Honduras were attacked. Their shops were burned. Families were beaten and robbed. Tens of thousands fled across the border with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They told stories of being hurt, robbed, and chased out of homes they'd lived in for years. El Salvador's government said Honduras was committing genocide against its citizens. Honduras said El Salvador was making things up. Both sides moved troops to the border. Shots were fired. People died. On July 14, 1969, at around 6 p.m., El Salvador attacked. The Salvadoran Air Force hit Honduran airfields using World War II-era P-51 Mustangs. They also used C-47 transport planes that had been quickly converted into bombers by having soldiers literally push bombs out the cargo doors. The Salvadoran army crossed the border on 2 fronts. One group headed for the rich farming region of the Sula Valley. The other marched along the Pan American Highway toward the Honduran capital. Now here's the part that military history buffs love. Both countries were fighting with leftover American equipment from World War II. We're talking P-51 Mustangs versus F-4U Corsairs. These were legendary fighter planes from the 1940s, going at each other in the skies of Central America in 1969. While the rest of the world was watching the moon landing and Woodstock, Honduras and El Salvador were having World War II dogfights. On July 17th, Honduran pilot Captain Fernando Soto shot down 3 Salvadoran planes in a single day, 1 Mustang and 2 Corsairs. This was the last time in history that propeller-driven fighter planes fought each other in combat. Soto became a national hero. His plane is still on display in a museum, with 3 white silhouettes painted on the side marking his kills. On the ground, El Salvador's larger army pushed deep into Honduras. They captured several towns. They got within striking distance of the capital. But Honduras fought back from the air, bombing Salvadoran fuel depots and oil storage tanks. Without fuel, the Salvadoran advance ground to a halt. Literally. The Organization of American States stepped in and demanded a ceasefire. On July 18th, after about 100 hours of fighting, the guns went quiet. El Salvador's troops didn't actually leave Honduras until early August, and only after the OAS threatened sanctions. The football war lasted just 4 days, but the damage was massive. The death toll is debated. Official numbers say a few hundred on each side, but most historians believe between 2,000 and 3,000 people died. Some estimates go as high as 6,000. Most of the dead were civilians. 12,000 people were wounded. Up to 300,000 Salvadorans were displaced from Honduras, many of them forced back into an El Salvador that couldn't support them. The Central American Common Market, a trade agreement between the countries in the region, collapsed. Honduras and El Salvador didn't sign a peace treaty until 1980, 11 years later. And it took a soccer match to start the reconciliation process. Seriously, they organized a friendly match to get the two countries talking again. But the worst consequence took years to show up. All those displaced Salvadorans, hundreds of thousands of landless, jobless people flooding back into a country already bursting at the seams, created a crisis that the government couldn't handle. Social unrest grew. The military cracked down, people disappeared, and by 1979, El Salvador had plunged into a brutal civil war that would last 12 years and kill 75,000 people. A 100-hour war planted the seeds for a decade of horror. The football war sounds like ancient history, but look at what's happening today. Sports rivalries still turn violent. Fans still attack each other. People still die over games. But the bigger lesson is about how the football war wasn't really about football. The matches were just the fuse. The real bomb was poverty, inequality, immigration, and politicians who found it easier to blame a neighbor than fix their own problems. The media on both sides pumped out hate until people believed every terrible thing about the other country. By the time the shooting started, both sides were convinced they were defending themselves. Sound familiar? Countries scapegoating immigrants for economic problems, media turning neighbors into enemies, politicians using nationalism to distract from their own failures. The playbook hasn't changed in 56 years. We've just traded newspapers for social media, and the hate travels faster. At least Honduras and El Salvador figured out how to make peace, eventually, with a soccer match, of course. Imagine this happening during the 2026 World Cup. Two countries are playing a qualifier. Fans outside the hotel keep the visiting team up all night. Someone live streams it. It gets 40 million views by morning. ESPN does a segment. The visiting team's social media manager posts a passive-aggressive story. Great hospitality, really feeling the love. An 18-year-old fan has a breakdown on TikTok after the loss. It goes viral. Politicians share it. Cable news runs it on a loop. Someone starts a GoFundMe. A senator tweets, "This is what happens when we let them win." The return match becomes the most watched sporting event of the year, not because of the soccer, because everyone's waiting for the riot. Fox Sports and ESPN split screen the game with live crowd footage. A commentator says, "You can feel the tension every 30 seconds. Someone replaces the visiting team's flag with a dirty mop. It becomes a meme within seconds. The mop gets its own Twitter account. It has 200,000 followers by halftime. After the match, border skirmishes break out. Both countries post drone footage on social media. A Pentagon spokesperson says they're monitoring the situation. A think tank publishes a 40-page report nobody reads. A podcast does a 3-part series on it that everyone listens to. The UN calls for calm. Both sides ignore it and tweet about it instead. So that's the football war of 1969. Two countries with real problems used soccer matches as an excuse to settle old scores. An 18-year-old girl's death became propaganda. World War II fighter planes battled in the skies while the rest of the world wasn't paying attention, and a 4-day war created consequences that lasted decades. The Honduran pilot who shot down 3 planes in one day, he became a national hero and his Corsair is still in a museum. El Salvador made it to the World Cup the next year. They lost every game without scoring a single goal. And the dirty dish rag they flew instead of the Honduran flag, nobody knows what happened to it. But honestly, it might be the most accurate symbol of the whole mess. Be sure to check out my Substack, Intelligence Bulletin from author Daniel P. Douglas, for more podcast series, written articles, and links to my books. Subscribe to never miss history's weirdest moments. Thanks for listening. Have a memorable day.